Hi, I'm Haley, and this is just a conversation. I have Christmas stuff up.
I love that.
Very excited about it
Do you have a
because
tree? Aw, Charlie Brown. Okay, my first question. Why did you ghost Justin when you first met him?
Tough. Ah, that's funny. I like to imagine you were like, this is the only thing I know about her. And so I'm going to Okay, why did I ghost Justin? Okay, we met on Tinder, which is scary to some extent. So I have very little sexual background, and so meeting on Tinder kind of like assumes a certain hookup culture, and I was like, not for me, one. Two, I had never like dated really someone before. I like had an ex-boyfriend, but he was more my friend than like a romantic interest. And so we had fun together, but it was like not like it there was times, and this is terrible to say out loud, where like plans would cancel and I would not be upset about it. So like the idea of dating someone who I'm actually like interested in and I enjoy spending time or enjoy talking to at least was like scary. But then I think that was mostly it, where I remember thinking that like this could really hurt and I have to decide that that's okay. So yeah, I ghosted him for a month. I uh purposefully made plans on times that are convenient for dates. So I would volunteer for like lab cleanups or something like that. So that way if he asked me out, I could be like, sorry, I'm busy, I'm booked and busy. Um yeah, so that's why I ghosted him for a month.
How did you get back to communicating?
We circled back. We like continued talking and like texting each other, but it was so ghosting is like maybe a little extreme. It was more or less just like we didn't see each other again, and like Justin offered up a date and I was like, I'm busy. That doesn't work, you know? But we were still talking back and forth, and I like have really bad anxiety. That's something that I've had my whole life. And I remember like telling him like, "Oh yeah, like my anxiety makes me it keeps me up at night, makes it hard to sleep. I get nervous about everything and I get nauseous and I just don't feel well." And I remember Justin like texted back, so sometimes it kind of like diminishes the like feel good things when it's over text, but still, he texted back like, yeah, I totally get that. Like, here's some experiences that I've had where it's like also like maybe some mental health illness issues, or maybe just some like not feeling totally great. And I was like, wow, I feel like I can really be like maybe a little open and a little vulnerable with this person. And so, like, it's worth at least taking the next step. With my like ex-boyfriend, one time I told him that I was like not feeling well and I was feeling anxious. And I remember he texted me back and he's like, take a nap, Chief, you'll be good. And I was like, no, 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 no. So it was like the like total change of pace was good for my brain.
What is it about Justin where you're like, I want to spend the rest of my life with this man's?
Okay, this sounds really terrible. I think with any relationship, there's always a like, maybe there's someone else out there for me, but I have no interest going through the heartache to get there, or no interest going through the to get there. Um, and Justin is just as good as that person is going to be, and makes me feel uh he makes me feel secure. I think from the onset, what I appreciate the most about Justin is he's always very validating, and that's something that like I don't necessarily get 100% of the time out of my family. And like I get out of my friends, but that's because I sought it out. Where like in any way that I feel or any boundary I set or anything that I say like not good with, not cool with, don't want to talk about this, really struggling with this. He's always very much like, how can I support you in that? How can I make you feel better? How can I help? There's like, I'll be sick, which is like normal. People get sick, and Justin will like go out and make me things for soup and then do the dishes afterwards, which is like biggest can't stand doing the dishes ever. So it's like I feel very seen, I feel very validated. And also like we just have fun together, I think. Like so last night was my holiday party And while my coworkers are fun, I was like, I'd so much rather just do this with Justin. Like, this is so boring. We were at the Museum of Science, which was really fun. And it was like, I just want to like hang out, you know? And there was like my mom a few weeks ago, I went and got coffee with one of my friends, and I was like, yeah, Justin was at home, and I feel bad about leaving Justin at home because it's like, I'm going to get coffee and going to have this conversation, and you're just going to go sit in our cold apartment where there's no really food, you know? And he's like, he's an adult, he can do things, he can figure stuff out. He's like perfectly capable of doing things on his own. But I was like, I just feel so guilty about like leaving him behind. And my mom was like, well, it's good to spend time apart. Like, you guys can't spend every minute together. And in my head, I was like, but what if I want to? Like, is that so bad? Does that make me codependent? Does that make me blah, 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 blah? And I've decided I actually just don't give a fuck. So,
Okay, let's go back to the beginning. What was growing up like?
okay. Okay, this is the I assumed this would come up, and so in my head I've been like, how do I tell this story in like a streamed line without like the thousand tangents that happen? Um, so I grew up in Northeast Indiana. I have an older brother and a younger brother. I grew up riding horses. I lived on a farm. My both my grandparents are farmers, so it was like a very much like as you assume Indiana life to be. But if you asked me what my childhood was like, it's like the one defining moment of my childhood was when my dad passed away, and everything else was just kind of like shocks off that event. So it was hard, I think in one word. Grew up in a single parent house. My mom is working on finishing her bachelor's degree right now. Super proud of her, but that means that her jobs were very what's the right word? Maybe like she wasn't compensated, undercompensating financially for the work that she was doing, and a lot of frustration on just like the money aspect of things of like I remember after my dad passed away, we had many conversations where it was like, we're probably gonna have to move to a different house, and I just need you to be ready for that. In a sense of like, like if things go southward financially, we're gonna be living in a much worse situation than we are, and that's gonna be enough to deal with that I'm letting you know now, so you can like start to get your head on straight, you know? So I would say like through no fault of like any of my family members, growing up was just hard. It was a lot of like, I didn't think like the loss of a loved one was real. Like death wasn't real, whatever, that's not a thing. And then it was like right smack in front of my face. And it was like, I don't like this. This is too real now, right? So yeah, I would say it was a lot of like aftershocks. And then also too, I think like in this weird backhand kind of way, you start to like really value my email is going off. I apologize. You start to value like the personal relationships that you develop, especially after losing someone so importantly. So it was like me and my family got really, really, really close because to some extent we had to. So it was like a kind of like this push and pull tension of like like I'm crying and my mom's gonna help me, and then my mom's crying, so I'm gonna help her. And then, like flash forward to 5 years later, and we're like, how has it been 5 years? How are we, and it's very much like just trying to get by.
Was
Yeah.
it expected when he passed, or was it out of nowhere?
Out of nowhere. So he was 40 years old. He smoked cigarettes, like I don't know how much. My mom says a lot, and I had no scale for how much that was, so it was just a lot. But he had a heart attack that they refer to as the Widowmaker. So it was literally like that evening that he passed away. My mom was at work. You-
That's a
my-
crazy name.
yeah, yeah. Because it's so extreme and it's so quick that it's like there's no like even if you would have caught it while it was happening, there's no way of saving the person. Yeah, but also crazy name. But I remember like the evening it happened, my mom was at work. My mom left food for us in the microwave. My dad was like, I'm not eating that shit. He took us to Subway. We all got food. He like left a sandwich and a cookie in the microwave for my mom when she got home from work. Um, he and like just recently he like got me and my brother lights for our bikes, and so it was like turning dusk. He passed away in September, so it was turning dusk, but it was still warm enough outside. And my brothers are like, I'm gonna go ride around on my bike. And I remember being like, I don't really want to ride around my bike. Like, I'm just not feeling that. And my dad was like, if you don't ride around on your bike, if you don't go outside with your brothers, you're gonna have to fold laundry. And like, as a kid, worst task possible, right? Like, that's no, you do anything. And so I remember like, oh, okay, suddenly I want to go ride my bike now, like whatever. And while we were outside riding our bikes, he passed away. It was so violent that he like threw up in the process, and they found like vomit in our house. But my mom was the one who found him. So it was like we were outside riding our bikes. He like passed away. And then we didn't know until she came home and she was like came into the house like screaming and like of course, right? You found your husband passed away. But it was like so sudden in the fact of like he took us out to like get dinner. We were like it was totally normal conversations, totally normal behavior. And then it was like he was gone the next minute.
How did you work through that? Slash, how are you working still through that?
Well, so now it's been 14 years. And so I remember like my dad used to go on trips, work trips to California. And so for like the first like year, it was like, oh, he'll be back. He'll be back, right? And like still to this day, I don't remember much of what happened like in those first years, right? Like I was 9 years old. You kind of like shut that part of your brain and you just try and get by. And then it was like around the 2 year mark, it's like, oh, like this stuff, like you can get through the first 2 years, and then after that is like when the grief starts to hit you, actually. So, in terms of like logistical and practical, how do we get through it? My mom repainted the house. She got some renovations done on the house that she wanted to, like I don't know how long we like all slept in the same room. Well, on the floor or like I would sleep in bed with mom just to know like I think in her mind like I need to touch all of my kids to make sure that they're okay. But I think really in a lot of it was like just leaning on like there was like lots of tears, lots of leaning on people that, like you could just talk. My dad's side of the family, we didn't know very well before he passed away, but after he passed away, we got really close with them. So like for the first 2 years, after he passed away, we were like going to see them and going to spend time with them every night, just in the sense of like it was like companionship going through this same kind of like grief processing. But yeah, I think still going through it, I think you just gotta talk it out, right? Like it's messy and it's gross. And my therapist is still like, do you think this is a function? And I'm like, yeah, probably. I feel like most things are, right? Like even when I first started dating Justin, it was like, surely you're gonna wake up someday and decide you don't enjoy me anymore, or you're gonna be gone. That's what I knew growing up, right? So yeah, I don't think you ever move on from it fully. You just talk about it more and more, and
Mhm.
then it gets easier to talk about. And then you talk about it more and more. It gets easier to talk about?
What advice would you give to someone who's dealing with that right now?
Um, oh God, that's hard. It sucks. But I think one thing my mom was really adamant about, at least like with me, or maybe I was just more like open to listening, was like you got to let yourself feel it as like sucky and unfortunate as it is. It's like at least with me and her, it was a lot of like you gotta cry because like that's the most healthy way of letting it out, right? And my older brother were like, not gonna cry, I'll be fine, I'll just deal with it and like lock it away. I was a crier, still am a huge crier, and I think to some extent that like just like it helps like have a physical release to some extent. Um, but like you just gotta feel it and you just gotta, I don't know. I feel like you just gotta feel it and you gotta talk to people about the way that you're feeling. Even if it makes them uncomfortable, like the other people that you're talking to uncomfortable, right? Like them, you went through this traumatic experience. Like, everyone needs to have an outlet.
Are there any perks to being in the Dead Dad Club?
You know what? If you ask my little brother, he would have like really quirky responses and he'd be like, "Da, da, da." Oh my God. Okay, can I tell you a side quest story?
Yeah.
Friday. So yesterday was my holiday party on today's Sunday. Friday at work, I have a coworker who was like, "Oh, I'm excited to meet Justin. Like, it'll be nice to put a face to the name." And he goes, "Do your parents like Justin?" And I'm like, "My mom likes him." And my coworker goes, "Just your mom?" And I was like, "You're gonna feel like an ass in about 5 seconds when I tell you this. And I just need you to know that it's fine, but you are gonna feel like an ass." Perks of being in the Dead Dad Club. I think, okay, this is maybe like a little like therapy talk getting into my brain. One, it brought my family really close together, and I think it really taught us to value, like, again, like the relationships that we have with people. And I think still that's something that I value a lot. Um, Two, my little brother is gay, and if my dad would have been around, me and my family talk all the time about how my little brother would not be openly gay, likely. And I think like maybe this is less like Dead Dad Club, but more like being raised by a single mom is there's a lot more like emotion maybe in our family, for better, for worse, both of the case. But like there's a lot more like emotional vulnerability and a lot more talking about the way that we feel and about the way things were affected by things, rather than like what my dad would have been like. You do the hard work, you move on, you get through it. And my mom gets that way sometimes, but there's a lot more like, okay, but how is this making you feel? Right? Like with my little brother, we love you as you are. It's more important that you're here than what other people think about us as a family, right? Growing up in like rural Indiana, gay people didn't exist, or at least you didn't talk about it. And so it was a lot more like, no, we value like having an open relationship with you over what other people think about. Do you think there's any benefit, like as an external force, do you see any like this could be a benefit of the Dead Dad Club?
Yeah, I think like obviously with any traumatic event, you'd
Mhm.
rather it didn't happen,
Right.
but I don't think it's like 100-0 all bad, no good. I
Yeah.
think you can if you're looking for it, find some like at least I can do that.
I think that's the general consensus me and my family come to, where it's like, yeah, that sucks, but we are all far better people for it. We're all far more like thoughtful people for it. We know what real hurt and real pain looks like and feels like. And like life is such a dice roll that, that was the hand that I got dealt, right? And there's people who have had easier childhoods and there's people that have had far worse childhoods. And I think to some extent, like having an experience like that is like this is the tip of an iceberg of what pain and suffering kind of looks like for people. And so I think it's like a real like empathy check of like, yeah, I had it worse than most people that I grew up with, but I don't have it the worst of everyone.
Were you ever angry?
I really just don't think I'm an angry person. And that might not be right. I really just my brothers got all the anger. I am much more of a like sad person about it. But I also like to think that I'm a pretty optimistic person, so I can see the silver lining in just about any situation. So, no on
Where
the
did
anger.
that come from?
I think you know what? I think like the answer to maybe all these questions is like probably my dead dad, right? Like, there was a lot of instances in which it's like, this sucks. But you know what would make me feel better is if I think about this thing that is good in it. I don't know. I think probably that's the question, the case where it kind of stemmed from. But I remember my neighbors were super close with my neighbors. We're super close growing up. I remember after my dad passed away, like there was one time we went over to go talk to them, and like one of my neighbors, like the adult, the mom of the family, was like, "God, Hailey, you're such a happy person all the time. Like, could you just ever like tone it down a little bit?" And I remember being like, what do you mean? Like, what is so wrong with that? But yeah, I just genuinely think it's like there's a silver lining in everything, and I just prefer to look at that.
What's your favorite memory that you remember of your dad?
Okay, so that's also a tough question. I was 9, right? And so anymore, it's mostly like I'm remembering the stories that people have said over and over again. Like I can remember what people regurgitate back to me. Um, Oh, this is terrible. I can tell you like some not fun memories that I remember. In that I remember it was super snowy out, and my dad was like, "You grew up with horses, so you'd have to feed them twice a day, no matter if it was cold or whatever." And so it was cold one day, and my dad was like, "Oh, come out and I'll help you feed them." And I like, it was good, like snow for like snowballs and I like made a snowball and he was like, if you throw that at me, I'm dunking you in the water horse's water tank. And so I threw it at him because I was like, oh, he's flying. And I remember him at least holding me above the water, about ready for me to go in. I feel like if I went into the water, I would remember that, but yeah. Um, yeah, again, like I just don't have a lot of I have like weird memories. There was one time my dad used to wear like white crew socks with like Carhartt ankle boots and like cargo shorts with wife beater shirts. And he used to have a tool belt that he would buckle around his waist. And like on the weekends when he was doing stuff around the house, like that's what he wore. And I remember in his tool belt, he had like a Swiss Army knife to some extent, right? Where it's got the pliers on the one end. And he like rolled down a sock and he was like, ah, guys, come here, come here. And he's like, this is a tick. And then he like got the tick with his Swiss Army knife pliers and like squeezed it in between them. He's like, if you see these on you, they're not good. So make sure you let us know. So like, yeah, the memories I have are very like weird and obscure and they're like hidden way back there. But it like if you every so often, if like you bring up a certain subject that like passed through and I'm like, oh, forgot about that one, you know?
You then grow up and go
Yes,
to St. Mary's.
correct.
Why did you pick your major?
Oh, my major?
Yeah.
Um,
What did you think I was going to ask?
why did I pick St. Mary's?
Oh, no, I don't. I just figure Notre Dame is a big deal in Indiana.
Yeah. So St. Mary's is a women's college, specifically not Notre Dame. I think to some extent. So okay, long story made longer is this. Uh, Single mom, very like not stable job. We had to pay for college. If we went, it was our job to pay for it. St. Mary's gave me the most aid. I ended up at St. Mary's. Wanted to either do political science or chemistry. I liked chemistry a lot in high school. I thought it was cool to kind of like start to understand how the world works. And also it feels fun. I don't know if that's true or not, but like it's just like you're building things, right? Like that's what chemistry is. You're like baking, but like on a smaller scale. Uh, and so it was just like it never felt like a chore to me. I don't know if that, yeah, chemistry never felt like a chore to me. And so my advisor for my first semester was like, well, it's easier to switch into poli sci if you start late than it is to switch into chemistry if you start late. So we'll put you on the chemistry track. You can drop out. My first semester chemistry professor was incredible. A professor who later caused me maybe a little bit of loss of sleep just because she was incredibly supportive but had very high expectations. And so it was like, come on, you gotta like keep it up, you gotta keep it going. But she was incredible, and it was a lot of like, look at all these cool things that you can do with chemistry. And she was really good about like fanning the fire of like, but what if you I was totally annoying, and my friends will say as much. And where it was like, I have a question. What about this? I have a question. What if we did this? And she was big, like, that's an interesting thought. Like, let's see what happens. What do you actually think? And so to some extent, that's like an ego boost, right? Where it was like, oh, I asked the cool question in class. And so I'm obviously the smartest, right? Not really, not at all, actually. But yeah, I just thought it was fun. You were like, I think chemistry is very much like you're taking tools and putting them in your belt. And it's like, how much chemistry have you taken?
Just high school.
Okay, so it's like polarity, right? It's like, ooh, that's an interesting concept. I'm gonna put that in my belt. How bonds form. That's an interesting concept. I'm gonna put it in my belt. So it's just kind of like you get all these more tools, all these tools, all these tools. And then it's like, okay, so now we have a question, and what do you want to do with it? And so to some extent, I enjoy chemistry because it's a roller coaster. The exhilaration rush when you figure it out is like top tier. You can't get better than that. But also it's just cool to kind of like see how the world, I think, around you works or how you can make things. I think that's what like the coolest part of chemistry is like you're making things, and like not to play God, but like it is you didn't create it. So
How
Yeah.
much of your job now is do you get that feeling?
Okay, so it's totally different now. So in college, it was like building the tools, right? Like learning about these things, and there wasn't ever this like, here's this question that we don't know the answer to, and you have to figure it out. It's always like, here's a question. The professor knows the answer to it, and you just have to get the right answer that the professor has. Now it's like no one knows the question, no one knows the answer, and I have to figure it out myself. So some things are harder than others. So right now I'm working on the small molecule crystallization team. So in like in regular terms, that's when we make the drugs, we have it floating around in solution. It's all liquid. We have to find a way to pull only that drug that we want out of solution. Most of the time by turning it into a solid form. And so some things are easier to pull out of the liquid and put into solid form than others. I have two molecules that I'm really working on right now. One's super easy to crystallize. One will not crystallize, even with my like God tier managers, like good hands. So it's like a little bit of both. I think what's different about like my job now versus school too is like the support that I have now is like more significant than in school. Just like when you're taking classes, the professor knows the answer. So it's like you're not like trying to pave new ground versus now no one knows the answer. And so everyone has like their own perspective or their own 2 cents that they can contribute. And like each brick will build a road eventually, or I hope at least.
You also recently moved to Boston
Yes.
with now fiance Justin.
Now fiance, now fiance Justin. Yes.
How has
Yes.
living together gone thus far?
Oh, it's the best. It really is the best. My friends ask the same question, and it's like, oh, how's living together? And it's like, you wouldn't bring that up if it's not going well for you, you know? Or it's like, like it could be really like hard and troublesome, but to me, it's mostly that like I have someone I know I'm coming home to. I started work, it was a lot of like, am I good for this job? Like, am I gonna do a good job? Am I gonna meet the expectations that they have for me? Like, it was a lot of stress and a lot of like stress that I put on myself, but reading into situations and being like, am I saying the right things? Am I acting the right way? Am I meeting the expectations that they have for me? And so, like, I remember there was one day where I was just like stressed out to the max over things that I absolutely did not have to be stressed out about. And it was like on paper, like it was just not a good day. It was fine, but I'm feeling really insecure about things. And when I came home, it was like Justin was there, ready to listen, but also he had IKEA furniture. And so it was like a task that I know I would succeed in. Like the IKEA bookshelves are not hard to build. So it was like, not only am I doing this with someone, I'm not coming home to an empty house, but I also like have someone who cares about me and cares about my well-being that like it like I come home to warmth, whether like emotional warmth. Obviously the apartment we're keeping a little colder, but there's like someone there to come home to. So it has been incredible. I cannot imagine and like applaud the people that can move out on their own for the first time and like there's no way I would be in Boston if I wasn't coming with someone. Like I just don't have that kind of confidence to move halfway across the country by myself. And so it's a lot more, it's like a lot of a like, I can do it because I know that you have my back, and you can do it because I have your back throughout it.
What was your perspective being proposed to?
Being proposed. Um, so we got engaged when this is such a story, I think. Every single person I tell, I'm like, I'm really not trying to be annoying about this. It's genuinely how it happened. So we were in Paris for the Olympics. We got engaged while we were in Paris, but leading up to Paris, I was not the most kind girlfriend, and I was like, it would be so beautiful to get engaged in Paris. Could you imagine if we got engaged in Paris? What a story. How beautiful. So like very superficial. And so then leading up to like us leaving for the trip, I remember turning into my mom and brother and being like, I just think it might not happen like I thought for sure that it would. My mom was like, you know what? Like, even if it doesn't, it'd be okay. Like, he's not going anywhere. But I think it's like really easy to some extent to feel a timeline. This is me just rambling on at this point. It's really easy to like when you graduate college to like find yourself on a timeline of like, okay, now this is like the first time in my life, right, that I don't have like these external deadlines set on the trajectory of my life. And so leaving college, it's a lot like, okay, well, what's next for me? You know, like I graduated, what's next? Now that I'm in the real working adult field, I'm like, God, like I feel so young. Like I could have waited to we could have waited anyways. That's none of the question that you asked me. The question, what was it like being proposed to? It was very sweet. We went out to dinner. It was just me and Justin. So we went to Paris with my mom and my little brother. It was just me and Justin going out to dinner. And we like ordered our food and it got to the table. And I remember we were talking about like money. And I was like, okay, like when we move in, at this point we knew we were moving to Boston. When we move in together, like I think that this is X, Y, and Z. Like I think that this is what financially how things should work. And Justin goes, yeah, like while we're on that topic, I think that we should look at rings. And I was like, yeah, we can look at rings. That's because people look at rings before they propose, right? Like that's a thing. And I was like, knowing we're on this trajectory, like we both have said, I have no interest in spending my life with anyone else. And I was like, yeah, like that's great. That's totally a good idea. And then he was like, Hailey, I'm asking you to marry me. So it was very like informal, which I think is perfect. I hate when people watch me while I like react to things. Like that is like Christmas presents. Please don't watch me open them. It feels like extra pressure. I don't need you gauging my reaction, right? And so when Justin proposed, it was just me and him out to dinner. It was very casual and it was just like really good for us. So it was a lot like oh, like this is happening. And like I've been thinking that this is gonna happen for so long that now that it is, it's like, what? What? And so I think like the more astounding moment was we picked out the ring while we were in Paris. And then it was like waking up the next morning and it being on my finger was like we picked out the ring while we were in Paris and then like feeling it on my hand for the rest of the evening. And then like when you wake up the first thing when you're conscious, right? It's like, "Oh, what feels heavy? Oh, I'm just toting around a rock all day, you know?" So, it feels like giddy and like of course, like this is the trajectory for us, but also like to have it set out and out loud is wild.
Okay, last question.
Hit me.
How important is family to you?
Okay, in short, very important. I think family is incredibly hard. In like, obviously, like I have some tough family background, but also like the families on both my mom and my dad's side, like that I grew up in, maybe weren't like I think everyone was just doing their best to get by. And so when you're doing your best to get by, there's a lot of like tension maybe between people, between family members. Like uh my family is very quick to make judgments on people, very quick judgments. And so that kind of breeds and like if you don't stay in line, then we're going to talk about you kind of environment. Um, and so like my immediate family, like obviously they're so important to me, right? Like we went through hell together and we grew stronger together because of it. But I think I have a harder time with more external family where it's you know like everyone is doing the best in their situation that they're given. Um, so family is important. I think it's a double-edged sword. Uh, but I think as equally important as family, I would argue are my friends and like the people that like see me at a vulnerable level. I think like there's that cliche, really terrible thing where it's like my chosen family. Ugh, gross. But to some extent, like my friends have like changed my life. And I can think of a few people who I'm better off having known them and who have influenced me to become more vulnerable and more authentic and more realistic in who I am as a person and more confident in who I am as a person. And so I think that it's like a combination of everything. Family's important, but I would argue, right, like your friends are also just as important. And sometimes too, it's like it's the people you surround yourself with, the people. I think family are just people who like encourage you to grow. And so you can't stay stagnant. So family is important, but also those people that act as family are just as important.
Here we go. Today's episode is in partnership with Daily Jam, this show's first partner. Daily Jam is my personal music playlist project. Currently, we are on year 7 of doing this, Daily Jam 7. The way it works is I add one new song every single day, 365 days a year, 366 on leap years with no repeats. The standard for the songs is in the name. Every song I believe is good enough to be played on repeat all day long. My personal Daily Jam. Humbly and respectfully, I have incredible music taste. So check the link in the description to go to my Spotify profile, Caleb Wolfgang, to listen to any Daily Jam playlist. I guarantee you will find songs you love and gems you've never heard before. Thank you to Daily Jam for being a sponsor of today's episode.